All right, welcome everybody to our presentation on the Negro League Baseball Museum. We're happy to have you here. I want to introduce our host and presenter today. His name is Raymond Doswell. He is the Vice President and Curator of the museum. So he surely knows all the ins and the outs and the little known facts about the museum and the Negro League that he will share with us today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Raymond, and welcome. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you and good afternoon, baseball fans. We're glad to be with you this afternoon to tell you about the history of African-American baseball and the Negro Leagues. We will do that through some photos and some artwork and some images from our museum and tell a few stories about this great history, which has important ties to the state of Missouri and the Midwest region. So we're coming to you from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, which is located in the 18th and Vine Historic District, east of downtown here in Kansas City, Missouri. The museum was founded in 1990, grew to a smaller, grew its first gallery in 1994 in the Lincoln Building in the district, but there was always a goal to create a larger facility that is where we are now, sharing a space with the American Jazz Museum. We're two separate organizations, but we do share a building. And in our space, we have this primary exhibit. Now, this is the end of what you see when you come to the Baseball Museum. The idea is you walk into the museum and you get to see this at the beginning, but you can't get to it, all right? This is the area that we call the Field of Legends. And on the Field of Legends are life-size bronze sculptures of key figures in African-American baseball history. Many of them are inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which is located in Cooperstown, New York. The significance of that for us is that we are not a Hall of Fame or the Black Baseball Hall of Fame, but we're not a Hall of Fame. We don't do special inductions in that way. It's important to us for folks to understand that the Negro Leagues existed because of racism and segregation. We do not want a segregated Hall of Fame. And when we built this space, as I noted, which opened in 1997, there were a number of ball players of import that were already honored by the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So as luck and fortune would have it, we had enough to model these base positions and even the batter after those players. So it worked out very well. Now, the idea, though, is that when you come to the museum, you follow a timeline of history that goes around this field, photographs and artifacts and films and information. And then at the end, you can walk onto the field, okay? And on the field are the statues. A couple of rules about the field. For those of you who are quite athletic, maybe real tempted to want to run around on the field, but please no running. The statues weigh 400 pounds apiece. So if you run into one, you will be knocked out. We don't want that, okay? We prefer you not touch them, and please don't try to talk to them. But if they talk back, well, the Jazz Museum has a shop with drinks and things that you can buy. So we'll get you a cool drink and have you sit out in the atrium there. But when you do exit out, you exit out through the gift store where we have books and caps and all kinds of gifts that you can buy for your friends and children and grandchildren to celebrate this history. Now, I want to try to tell you a quick story as you go around the museum. About halfway through, which is just over the center field wall here in our exhibit, on the other side of that wall, we have a number of exhibits, but one in particular I want to tell you about because it illuminates, I think, the essence of the Negro Leagues, in my opinion. And it's one of my, if people ask me what my favorite item is in the museum, I don't really have a favorite, but this is one I like to talk about. So there is a photograph on the wall that we've blown up, but the original photograph is only about 4 by 4 inch Polaroid from the 1950s. The photo shows a young man, and he's standing near train tracks at a train station with a duffel bag and on the ground. He is an athlete, but you don't see any baseballs, you don't see any bats, you don't see any gloves, anything. He's just a young man about to take an incredible journey in his life, standing at the train tracks. He's standing posing for this photo, the sun shining in his face, looking nervous but ready to go. The photo is accompanied, we got a copy of a letter that accompanied this photograph. As it turns out, this was a correspondence between two baseball team officials from the Negro Leagues in the early 1950s. And they are recruiting this young man to play for their team. All right. And in the letter, which is written by the field manager to the business manager of the team, he makes a prediction. He says, I do think he will develop into a great player one of these days. I do think he will develop into a great player one of these days. Well, the author was prophetic because he is joining a team called the Indianapolis Clowns on his way leaving Mobile, Alabama. Was a great cross-handed hitting infielder who could tear the cover off the ball. They changed his unorthodox swing, and he became probably one of the greatest hitters of all time. Those spent about a couple of months with the Clowns before being recruited by the Braves organization in Major League Baseball, and then going up from there to join the Boston and Milwaukee Braves before moving to Atlanta, becoming the all-time home run leader in Major League Baseball. And that is the great Henry Louis Aaron, who unfortunately we lost this year, but was a great man and a great ball player. You see the color photo at the top of my slide there. That's from 1999. He came to visit the museum. We were fortunate to have a press conference, and I got a chance to spend a little time with him. Our little banner on our table there says discover greatness above our name. Discover greatness is our motto. And that photo of Mr. Aaron, I believe, is a moment when greatness is discovered. Here he is. He's only 17 years old in that photograph. And he's on his way to fame and fortune as one of the greatest baseball players of all time. And this is the quality of player and talent and people that were part of what we call the Negro Leagues. But still, that requires definition. So, as I like to talk to teachers a lot, we try to define what the Negro Leagues were. First, just a couple of things in regard to the use of terminology. Of course, we don't use the term Negro anymore as a descriptive for people. It's an archaic term, but that's what they were called back then, and that's what some of these leagues and teams had in their titles and structures. So from the standpoint of authenticity, we keep a name like Negro, and another archaic term is colored. You'll see that often used as well. Again, archaic terms, but part of the times back then in terms of describing what they were. Now, the leagues, though, also, I want to emphasize leagues plural with an S. It's not Negro League, it's always leagues. There were multiple different leagues. And what's a league? In this case, that's a grouping of teams agreeing to play common opponents on a regular schedule with the governing body that governs rules and transactions and all kinds of settles disputes and these kinds of things. Having league structures was very important, and I'll get in more into that a little bit later. But there were multiple leagues. It wasn't just one league. And leagues were small businesses, and the teams were even smaller businesses that were part of those larger organizations. So that's how one needs to think about it. And this business structure represented the highest level of professional baseball that was available to African American and Latino athletes during the late 19th century through the mid 20th century in the United States. I also want to emphasize that connection to our Latino athletes, especially Afro-Latino athletes, meaning that there were, in places like Cuba and Puerto Rico and other places, they had issues of color just like we did in the United States in terms of darker skin, lighter skin, and things like that. Although obviously culturally, there is a lineage from Africa and slavery through those territories is just like the United States. But if you're Afro-Latino and wanted to play baseball in the United States, these leagues were available to you because you were not allowed to play in the so-called white major leagues. But there were lighter skinned Cubans and others who played Major League Baseball because they could pass for white. These leagues existed because of racial segregation in America. And we study the role of these teams and athletes from about 1860 to 1960, roughly 100 years of history, beginnings through the end of the Civil War up through the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. And that's kind of the scope of the history. Now, I mentioned, if I go back a few years, if I mentioned that that there were white Cubans and others who got a chance to play Major League Baseball. But if you go back even further to the 1880s, 1870s, there were actually individual African Americans as well who played on all white teams in the United States. And some of those teams were considered major league or had a major league designation later on by historians. And not to get into the definition of a major league, but generally speaking, that meant that these were teams also, because there's a lot of amateur baseball, black and white, but these teams were part of a league organization that had a published schedule and played a high level of baseball as the historians have defined it. But there were African Americans who played on some of these teams. Here's one photo, and you see that there's a young man who doesn't look like the rest of his teammates, and that's Moses Walker, Moses Fleetwood Walker from Steubenville, Ohio. Many historians credit him as being actually the first African American in Major League Baseball, as this team in Toledo, Ohio, where he's posing, was considered a major league team. Actually, there were maybe even a couple of guys before him who played on so-called major league teams, but they were more fair-skinned in color, so they could hide their ancestry, whereas Walker could not. So that's why many historians credit him as the first African American in Major League Baseball. And his brother Weldy also played baseball for some of these teams. But by 1900, on these major and minor teams, players like Walker were pushed out. There were never any written rules that said that they could not play on these teams. A few, as we get into the early 1900s, you start to see that being codified in leagues like the International League, which was a major league at one point. But for the most part, no written rules. Just collusion among team owners and managers that would not recruit more Black players because they were successful. But Black players and entrepreneurs said, okay, well, we'll try to do our own thing. African Americans have been studying the development of baseball over the years. I mean, going back to slavery, baseball itself is kind of emerging as an interesting ball and stick game in the 1850s, and then becomes more professional as we get to the 1870s. And African Americans are watching this develop. They're watching soldiers play it during the Civil War, and they're watching others. They're learning it. They're becoming quite good at it. So you have these handful of opportunities, and then when they dry up, Black baseball entrepreneurs say, okay, well, we'll try to do our own. We'll create our own teams, create our own leagues. But the success of that was kind of hit and miss. And part of that was not having league structures made for less stable teams. Again, we'll get more into that, but let's begin our tour of the museum as well. Now, when you walk through the building, you walk into the building, there's a large atrium there. Across the hall is the American Jazz Museum, and here's the facade of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, looking like an old stadium. And then you walk in to the turnstiles, and you'll come across some other exhibits. Now, let me explain first that in order to understand the Negro Leagues too, we have to understand a period in American history that we call the Great Migration. This chart from Britannica specifically talks about 1916, which is the cusp of World War I, through 1970. And millions of African Americans are moving across the country, especially out of the South, into the North, into the West, and into the Midwest. Now, everybody's moving. Black and white people are moving as the country is becoming less agrarian and more industrial, moving from the farmlands to the cities. And that's why baseball is so appealing to a lot of people, because you come into these ballparks, they evoke pastoral life with the green grass and the large expanse and things like that, something that people miss from their past. But for African Americans in particular, they're leaving plantation life and sharecropping life and moving into the cities. Even in the South, they're moving, say, in Alabama, um, uh, in the rural areas of Alabama to Birmingham, because in Birmingham, there are large steel factories and iron factories cropping up. And the same thing's happening in Pittsburgh, and African Americans are moving to that area. They're moving to Detroit for the car making industry. They're moving to St. Louis and Kansas City for the railroad, meat packing industries, Chicago as well. They start to settle in Harlem, hoping for a better life, hoping for more freedom, not necessarily getting all of that. Unfortunately, sometimes getting redlined and cropped into certain neighborhoods and ghettoized to some degree, but creating institutions for themselves and building up a bit of a middle class in many respects because of the jobs and the growing influx of people. So at the museum, when you walk through the turnstiles and you get to see this chart demonstrates the locations of some of the cities where these teams were, which followed the Great Migration, and some of the names of the teams. This particular chart also breaks down the number of leagues that began to exist in a particular period, 1920 to 1955. Now we recognize actually 1920 to 1960 as the primary period for the Negro Leagues. There are about 30 different communities represented here and over 75 teams represented just on this chart. And that's an incomplete list, but it shows you the core of what the leagues were about. And again, they were spread out over many of these same cities that the migration patterns followed. Um, Mostly major cities, and of course, Kansas City is among them, one of the westernmost of those cities during that time period. And folk developed their own neighborhoods and their own businesses, their schools, their churches, their clothing stores, their bakeries, and all kinds of things. And among those businesses were baseball teams. Now, if we look back 100 years, just 100 years, we see some interesting parallels to today. Of course, there was a pandemic going on between 1918 and 1920, the so-called Spanish flu pandemic, which really hampered a lot of things across the country at the end of World War One. Similar restrictions as we're seeing today, including in sports. You see these ball players wearing masks while they're trying to play, which may have seemed silly a couple of years ago looking at this photo, but we've been experiencing that in the last couple of years. Unfortunately, another parallel that was happening was racial strife across the country in the form of many race riots. As the war ended, Black soldiers and others had fought valiantly for the country and wanted certain rights when they got back home, and many others were coming back home as well. And there were forces that kind of pitted the different races against each other as they were all competing for different resources that were out there. And there was an explosion of race riots across the country. Beginning in 1917, there were riots in Houston. There was a major riot in St. Louis. Arkansas had one of the biggest ones, and one of the major ones was also in Chicago, where there was some just brutal atrocities that were happening, and African Americans in particular suffered the most in this so-called Red Summer period. But African Americans responded through strength. Among the responses included what historians have described as the new Negro movement in the Harlem Renaissance. So you get an explosion of political activity, you get an explosion of arts and letters coming out of this period, a great creativity through jazz and dance as well. And then you start to see the spark of different kinds of political activities like the UNIA, which is United Negro Improvement Association, led by Marcus Garvey, who had a movement that was about empowerment, but going back to Africa and leaving the United States for many others. And that was an inspiration for groups like the Nation of Islam, whose initial kind of spark too was about racial empowerment. You see, this is the photo here is a parade in New York for the UNIA. And it says on the banner of the float there, it says the new Negro has no fear. The new Negro has no fear. They are willing to fight back and want certain rights. And you start to see a push. I mean, the NAACP comes before this period, but it gained some momentum in terms of what they were trying to do after this period. And so it's in this kind of mix of everything that was happening that you see the birth of what we call the more formal Negro Leagues. This is one of the exhibits in the museum, the 1920 section. And you start to see the formation of the leagues take place. And as we mentioned, some of the cities where folks had migrated to, Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis, Kansas City, are among the places that had teams. And you see the team names on the board above the exhibit walls there. So what's happening by this time is that even during that earlier period, there were Black baseball teams trying to get it together and trying to attempt to create leagues, because most of the time they were just traveling circuses. They were entertainers. Um, they traveled the country. They played baseball. They didn't have a regular schedule. They played black and white competition. They're having fun, but that kind of travel was difficult. One, because you didn't know when money was coming. Two, you had to do it in segregated conditions, segregated trains, segregated hotels, everything. And if you didn't have a regular schedule, then you didn't have stability, because you had to hope that your game wasn't going to get rained out and things like that. You could go bankrupt on the road. Okay. Mastering travel, mastering segregation, mastering the schedule were very important. All these, and on top of that, all these independent Black baseball teams will say, we're the world's color champions. They would say, no, and the other guy, we're the world's color champions. There was no way to settle it on the field. Okay. The team in Chicago, and there's a team in Detroit. Maybe they're close enough to play each other, but then the team in Philadelphia will say something, and there was no way to settle. So what's happening? By 1920, you start to get a critical mass of people in all these cities that we list here. If you got mass of people, they need something to do. They want to play. They're going to watch baseball games, so they have money to go watch baseball games, and you can start to have fan bases. And that's where the push came to kind of create a more formal league. Also, in baseball, in addition to the aftermath of those race riots and everything else, in Major League Baseball, there was a so-called Black Sox scandal, where the Chicago White Sox baseball team cavorted with gamblers to throw the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds, bringing a black eye to baseball as a whole. Um, uh, Many of the Black baseball teams wanted to kind of formalize, to legitimize their operations to avoid the specter of gambling in their game. The statue there in the middle of our exhibit is of a man named Andrew Foster. His nickname was Rube Foster. And Rube Foster was born in Calvert, Texas in 1879, was an outstanding athlete and played baseball in the United States and in Latin America. By the early 1900s, had found himself playing baseball in Philadelphia, and then would move to Chicago. His playing career stopped soon because he had hurt his arm, but he was a great tactician and manager of teams. Founded a team called the Chicago American Giants in 1911, and was one of those early people pushing the other Midwestern team owners to try to get some kind of league structure going. And the Black newspapers were also pushing this issue, because many of the Black newspapers, like the Chicago Defender, who's reporting on this meeting I'm about to talk to you about, and the Pittsburgh Courier, among others, had national circulation beyond their home cities. But he and other Midwestern team owners came together in a meeting to form what will become the Negro National League. And that's the reporting that's being done by the Defender here in February of 1920. That meeting was held at the YMCA building at 18th and Paseo here in Kansas City, known as the Colored YMCA. It had its own unique history because it was built by the Black community, although segregated YMCA. But that is where the meeting was held. And this is why I consider Kansas City the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. And that meeting is the birthplace of Negro Leagues baseball. Last year, we tried to celebrate the 100th anniversary of that meeting, which we got kicked off, and then the pandemic interrupted. We did get some important events going and a lot of national attention in spite of being closed for a few months last year. So I'd say on the whole, it ended up being rather successful. But it was an important anniversary for baseball history. And Major League Baseball recognized it as well. But among those early teams included Foster Chicago American Giants, who's photographed there at the bottom. Kansas City's representatives were the Monarchs, a team made up of a lot of Army veterans and baseball players. Um, and there was also a team in St. Louis called the St. Louis Stars. You saw other communities represented: Indianapolis, Detroit, Dayton, Ohio, among others. A rival league would form in the East a few years later called the Eastern Colored League. And that included teams in and around Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore area. And there was even some leagues that formed in the South um, as affiliate leagues in and around Atlanta, Jacksonville, Florida, and places like that. And soon they would have interleague play, and it took off from there from about 1920 to roughly 1930. Now, black teams who had the most success were able to master travel. As the communities are growing, the roads are getting better across the country. And we see, of course, the rise of motor coaches and automobiles as well. And a team that could manage and afford their own bus in particular could have the greatest financial success. So let's say the team in Kansas City has games against their league affiliate in St. Louis, all right? So they're going down to St. Louis, across, it was before this was I-70, but whatever road it was then. On their way to St. Louis, could play games against all competition along the way in Lee Summit and in Columbia, Missouri, and Jefferson City, and then O'Fallon, Missouri, until they got to St. Louis. And that could be white or black competition. Now, those weren't league games, so they didn't count towards their league records, but they were able to make money doing those games. Um, and of course, find places to eat. And so after a while, a team like the Monarchs, who was the Kansas City team, could get into a rhythm going across the state, especially if they went to white communities, because they entertained the people and they made those communities money as well. So they ensured that segregated conditions were thwarted by making sure that they had a place to eat, a place to sleep, and all these kinds of things. And they would get invited back for the 4th of July or Labor Day or Memorial Day or all these great occasions. And it was a big deal for a small town because this was the closest that they were going to get to a major league team coming to their town. It was very important. And they knew the competition was very good and they knew the team was entertaining. So made more money, more revenue, more stability. Okay. But traveling across the Midwest in particular was important to manage that because traveling while black in a place like Missouri, unfortunately, was very dangerous. As I noted, you could create a network of places to go, whether they be black or white, places to stay, maybe boarding houses, farms, and other things. Otherwise, you had to drive all night from place to place. And you're in a place like the Midwest where you think things are more progressive and they're not. And you could run into a hornet's nest of problems if you're not aware of your surroundings. Because Missouri, in particular, was, among other states, was notorious for having what they call sundown towns. Many of these smaller communities had laws on the books that said if you were African American, you were out after a certain time of night, and you weren't a chauffeur, driver, delivery man, or working, you could be subject to questioning and arrest. So you had to make sure you weren't out, you had a place to stay, or you were on a bus somewhere and you were heading out of town. And so it was very difficult back then for them, and they had to manage that. But still, having to deal with the indignities of having to go to the back of a grocery store to get food, or back of a restaurant to eat, or if they were allowed in at all, they would make the food, take their money, make the food, and make them eat on the bus, and things like that. So these are the kinds of things that they had to do, and the gymnastics they had to go through just to play baseball. But among the other things that they were able to do and innovations were the master night baseball games. Now we're getting up to about 1930-ish time period, and a lot of teams, black and white, are experimenting with having lights at baseball parks. But most of the stadiums were stationary. They'd build the lights and they'd have them stationary at the stadium. You look at my photo here. There's a white background photo there with the truck and a pole lighting system. That's the Kansas City Monarchs traveling lighting system. They were able to take their lights on the road with them. And as early as spring of 1930, they were playing night baseball in places like Memphis and Texas and other places. This is 5 years before the first official night baseball game in Major League Baseball. So they're innovating in that way. And this was something that they had to do to keep pace because actually by 1930, of course, a major historical event is happening. The stock market crash and subsequent Great Depression in the United States, which actually affected everyone and even Negro League teams because those leagues that I mentioned earlier, the Negro National League and Eastern Color League, both of them folded as business operations as a league, partly as a result of the financial crisis. Individual teams like the Monarchs, as a business, kept going and they traveled across the country, traveled across the Midwest, and even into Canada. So things were kind of bleak for a little while. But by 1933, things began to get better. And that's this part of the exhibit called the Golden Years. And this is where we see things start to improve across the country, but especially in Negro Leagues baseball. Um, Among the things that the new leagues began to reform, and the Monarchs would come back and play in those leagues. Among the things that the leagues would try to do was have an All-Star game. Major League Baseball's first All-Star game was 1933. So the Negro League said, okay, we'll do the same thing. We'll have our own All-Star game. But what was unique was that they held it every year in Chicago. And they held it at Comiskey Park in Chicago, which the Chicago White Sox major league team owned. The White Sox had a relationship with the American Giants for many years. This is a giant ballpark. It holds over 50,000 people. It's on the south side of Chicago, which is where the black population was. So there's lots of hotels and restaurants and things around that would serve the many tourists that would come for this summer game, a big event that usually happened in August of every year. Beauty shops and barber shops among the many places and things that could serve the black population safely in that community. So it was a big business proposition as well as great entertainment annually. And that game was always held annually there with a couple of exceptions in Chicago. Um, and that was part of just the luscious part of the activities that happen in many communities across the country. This is just an example. This photo is of things related to Kansas City. Those are old turnstiles from Municipal Stadium in Kansas City. They're orange because I think Charlie Finley painted them orange or had them orange, but we have them here at the museum. And pictures of 18th and Vine and artifacts related to that. There were beauty contests, there were parades for opening day, all kinds of activities here in Kansas City. And there were at least 3,000 ball players in the history of the Negro Leagues, many of them playing in cities like Cleveland and Minnesota and Chicago, as I mentioned. Many of them were some of the greatest players of all time, and they entertained thousands of fans across the country, especially in their heyday. Comiskey Park could hold over 50,000 fans, and some of those All-Star games had 30 to 40,000 fans every year. The Monarchs were a great draw. This is a Monarchs versus Clowns game from the 1950s here in Kansas City at the old stadium, and there are hundreds of people here enjoying the game. Now, I'm going to skip ahead. We're close to the end here to World War II. In World War II, African Americans are fighting valiantly again for their country and fighting abroad against the forces of the Nazis and the fascists, but aren't afforded certain rights at home in the United States, facing similar setbacks. The irony of that is not lost on many, especially those in the Black press in particular. This photo cover of this magazine features a ball player. His name is Ernest Carter, and he plays for the Homestead Grays. He has a little W on his uniform because the Grays now play in Washington, D.C. So the Grays were a team. Homestead is actually a city outside of Pittsburgh, and the Grays were a popular team in Pittsburgh. They fell on some hard financial times and decided to move their operations to Washington, D.C., and they would rent the ballpark a lot of black teams, that's important. A lot of black teams rented their baseball stadiums from white baseball teams. So that's an important financial thing. But they rented the Griffith Stadium, which was owned by the Washington Senators, which was a major league team. Griffith Stadium's in the heart of the black community in Washington. In fact, it's not there anymore. Howard University Hospital was on that site. Howard University is a historically black college. All right. So the Grays in this period, like 1939 to about the mid 1940s, are in a stretch of several Negro League championships and division winning. They are a strong team, maybe one of the strongest teams in history of the Negro Leagues and baseball in particular. Just an outstanding team, usually playing at Griffith Stadium on the weekends. You can see outstanding play if you came on Saturdays and Sundays. Now you come on Tuesday and watch the Senators. In Major League Baseball, in the same time period, they only have one winning season. Maybe one of the worst teams in baseball history. So the slogan back then was Washington, first in war, first in peace, last in the American League East. So you could be a white fan. You could go to the games on Sunday and watch the black team. There was no restrictions on race as far as going to games. You see outstanding play. You come back on Tuesday and watch the Senators and you question, why can't we have those players? We would be so much better. To the Senators' credit, they were a little late to the game, but once integration happened, they were very aggressive at getting Cuban players into their ranks, which was very helpful for them. Still, in this time period, they were not very good, and they weren't integrated. In addition to all that, the political winds are changing, of course, with the war changing and the war effort and the effort of African Americans in the war effort. This notion of integration of baseball as a labor issue comes to the fore, especially in places like New York, where the mayor and others began commissions on this issue. New York has 3 Major League Baseball teams: the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Giants. They all want to play baseball on Sunday to make money. The city has to give them permission to play baseball on Sunday. If they want permission to play baseball on Sunday, they need to think about this labor issue of integration. They're getting pushed by the black press. They're getting pushed by labor unions. They're getting pushed in particular by the communist press, the Daily Worker, who was pushing this as a labor issue. All that, political wins, everything else, and the white team seeing successful black teams making money in their ballparks. All this swirling around, and then a young man appears by the name of Jack Robinson, better known by many folks as Jackie Robinson. Born in Cairo, Georgia, 1919. His family escaped Georgia sharecropping, moved all the way across country to Pasadena, California. It's where their migration was. Where he grew up on Pepper Street in Pasadena. He had an athletic family. His brother Mac was an Olympian, actually competed with Jesse Owens during the 36 Olympics in Germany. But Jackie came along and broke all his brother's high school and intercollegiate records in track and field. You see this collage of photographs show Jackie at Pasadena Junior College playing baseball, and later with UCLA, he transferred there. He was a track and field star. He played basketball. The top there in those really funky leather helmets, they're playing football. He plays with the UCLA Bruins in the Rose Bowl as well. That's him in the middle, number 28, with Willie Strode and Kenny Washington, 2 of the first African Americans in the National Football League. So he could have played football. He could have played basketball. Baseball was his weakest sport. I mean, he's good looking. He can play tennis. He can play golf. You hate him. But the only thing he couldn't do was swim, which is another story, another lecture for another day. It's a very interesting story. But he could do it all. And probably would have considered a professional career in something. Obviously, the baseball wasn't open to him in the same way. But could have done that. But we're in the middle of a war, so he gets drafted in the United States Army. That's him at the top there, left corner at Fort Riley, Kansas, which is where he was stationed. He and other black soldiers pushed hard to get into officers training school. Met a lot of resistance, but ultimately were able to get in. He graduated as lieutenant and was transferred to Fort Hood, Texas, where he trained a tank battalion. Now he can't go to the European theater because he has injuries from playing football on his ankles, but he's training folks to go over. Um, One day, leaving a medical appointment about his ankles, he gets on a bus next to a young lady going back to from the hospital to the base. Young lady's very fair skinned. She looks white, but it turns out she was black and is a friend of his, actually married to one of his fellow soldiers. But the bus driver does not like this and orders him to the back of the bus. They get into a very heated argument, and then when they get to the base, he is confronted by the military police and is brought up on court martial charges. Um, he beats this court martial, but asks for a discharge from the army because he needs a job now. And guess who's hiring black baseball teams? Because they've lost a lot of ball players to the war, as well as white baseball teams. But black baseball teams also lose a lot of players to the war, although the level of play in black baseball is still pretty high compared to white baseball. So that's him on the right joining the Kansas City Monarchs. And that is the great Leroy Satchel Paige on the left, his teammate. This is 1945, the 1945 season. Was a decent infielder. He's 26 years old at this time. Um, and as fortune would have it, the Brooklyn Dodgers, not wanting to bend to those political pressures that I mentioned earlier, decided that they wanted to try to recruit African American players. And Branch Rickey, who was the general manager there, settled on Robinson. And they signed him to a minor league contract at the end of that season. He plays a minor league season with the Montreal Royals, the Dodgers farm team, and then is elevated to the Brooklyn Dodgers in April of 1947, 74 years ago. So next year is 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson's appearance with the Dodgers. This opens the door for many other players. This is Hank Thompson, who played with the Monarchs as well. He and Willard Brown actually joined the St. Louis Browns a few weeks after Robinson. They don't work out there, but Brown comes back to the Negro Leagues with the Monarchs and is one of the great home run hitters in history. Thompson stays in the major leagues, goes on to the New York Giants, and becomes a World Series champion. Opens the door for Afro-Latino players like Orestes Minoso, better known as Minnie Minoso, who starred with the New York Cubans and in his home country of Cuba, and eventually came to the Chicago White Sox in Major League Baseball and became a champion. Opened the door for coaches and managers. This is John Buck O'Neill. Buck played with the Kansas City Monarchs as the first baseman and would later become a coach in Major League Baseball, actually officially on field, the first African American coach in Major League Baseball in 1962. Forgive me, I left this slide in here for a presentation I did in New Jersey, but I can mention Don Newcomb, who was also a person from Madison, New Jersey, who later came up and was the first pitcher to win a Cy Young Award. But look at the photo in the middle. The Dodgers were very aggressive at getting black players. That's Jackie Robinson. Dan Bankhead is the second player who came up in September 1947. There's Newcomb, who came up in about 1948, and the great Roy Campanella, the catcher, in 1948 as well, 1949. 49 for Newcomb, 48 for Campanella. And as you see, the Dodgers were among the teams that had the most African American, eventually Latino players, and that proved to be successful for them. Now we talk about all these stories in our new Barrier Breakers exhibit, where we speak to some of the first players who played on white major league teams between 1947 and 1959, which is a period in which every team had at least one black or Latino player on their roster. And we have photos of all those players who were the first, as well as key players who helped to integrate in between, like Monty Irvin and Ernie Banks, among others. Now, what this meant was that black fans were leaving the Negro Leagues to go watch the white major leagues. And the Negro Leagues tried a few things, including having women play with the men on the all-black teams, but it wasn't enough to keep black fans coming out. And there were three women who did play in the 1950s: Toni Stone, Connie Morgan, and Mamie Johnson. Not enough to keep the attraction going for black fans. And although integration meant moving the country towards a more just society, it really was a death knell for the formal Negro Leagues, whose teams and organizations began to fade away by 1960. But if we look at their record books, we see some remarkable results. Here are two just quick notes in terms of the impact of Black and Latino players on Major League Baseball. So the first list is of the Rookie of the Year, Outstanding First Year Player Awards, which began with Jackie Robinson in 1947. And in that period, there's only maybe, as I look at the map of the chart, 1954 and 1957 are the only years in which Black players did not win the award. Black and Latin players dominate the award. Same with the Most Valuable Player Award. Again, dominance by Black and Latino players, including Roy Campanella 3 times and Ernie Banks twice in this period. Segregation seemed ludicrous now when you look at the level of talent that immediately floods into Major League Baseball. Many of those players are honored by the National Baseball Hall of Fame, as we noted earlier, and we have a mock locker section for many of those players as they are honored there, with the exception of key players who were part of integration. So there's first photo is of Henry Aaron, and the third photo is of Ernie Banks, all important Hall of Famers, but they're noted for their play in the major leagues, whereas Biz Mackey and Judy Johnson and Norman Turkey Stearns and Ray Brown and Willard Brown are all inducted for their play in the Negro League. So they have lockers, and some of them, like Mr. Johnson, has a statue on our Field of Legends. As we wrap up our walk around the museum, you'll come across this wall of uniforms and hats, replicas of what the uniforms and jerseys and caps look like from the old teams. And if you turn around, you will witness the Field of Legends once again. And so that's the end of our walkthrough. I'm happy to take some questions for you as our artist, Robert Hayden, carved this question mark bat to ask what would the world as well as baseball have been like had integration happened sooner. And we can always bring these questions to the fore. Before we do that, just if you're interested in digging deeper, and I can share this for you to have later. If you're interested in digging into statistics or other information, these websites are very helpful. Seamheads.com and baseballreference.com are the ones that are keeping up with the statistics of the Negro Leagues as best they can. The Baseball Hall of Fame has a wonderful page on the players who are inducted that were part of Negro Leagues. Retrosheet.org has more Negro League listings, but box scores, especially on players like Jackie Robinson. If you are a baseball fan and you want to go back and remember a game that you maybe went to as a child, this website probably has the box score and in some cases the play-by-play of many of those games, depending on how far you go back. So that's a great resource. And finally, if you want to learn more about us, we're on nlbm.com as our website, where you can also do some online shopping. We do have YouTube programming too for video programs that we've done in the past and future programs. We have what we call our e-museum for teachers. This is going to be completely revamped very soon, but if you want to dig deeper on player biographies, and if you're a teacher and you want to do some lessons, this is a good resource. We're on Facebook, and you can follow us on Twitter at our museum link, and our president is Bob Kendrick, and he tweets out frequently as well. I tweet out too, but not as much as him, so I won't then include my address there. So that is my talk. So I'm going to stop my screen, and sorry if I went a little long, but I'm happy to take questions. We have time to take questions from.
We have a question in the chat, Raymond, asking,
Okay.
was it Satchel Paige, Buck O'Neill, or someone else who was the force behind the establishment of the museum?
So Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Page passed away in 1982. The museum was founded in 1990. Mr. O'Neill was among a number of people, including former players who lived here in town, to help establish the museum. He, the former players, and a number of business people and some historians really came together to put it together. Mr. O'Neill, though, was voted the museum's first chairman and was a spokesperson for the museum for many years until his passing in 2006.
If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or you can throw it in the chat. Do we have any other questions? All right, you must have covered it.
Well, very good. Again, we are open. If you want to venture out, we do require masks, but we're open 10 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday, and noon to 5 on Sundays, closed on Mondays. Generally speaking, it's a self-guided tour experience with the gift shop, and there's a discount for seniors of $1 off tickets. It's usually $9, but you can even save a little more money if you want to see the Jazz Museum and see both museums. It's a good time to come because admittedly, all traffic's a little slower right now. I wouldn't have blamed you for not coming in the summer. We were very busy this summer, but things are slowing down a bit, and you can come on out, feel safe to do so, and really enjoy yourself. If it gets a little busy, it may be because the Chiefs are in town, and then we get lots of visitors who are following the opposing team that like to come and visit. But it hasn't been really crowded this fall so far, and we want you to come out, follow us on Facebook. There may be even events and things that may pop up that you may want to be a part of. Oh, and before I forget, and I didn't show this in the slide, we do have a new temporary exhibit here called Play Ball from the Smithsonian. It is about the Latino baseball experience in the United States and around the world. Includes films and things like that. It's in our changing gallery, and it's actually free. You don't have to buy a ticket to see that, but it is only here through November 14th. So you can come down and check that out. And it's not very large. There's lots to read, but lots of great images and things like that. So Play Ball, which is here through November 14th on loan from the Smithsonian in partnership with the Kansas City Museum.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Raymond, for joining us today. And everybody who joined us, we hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.